What is up, everyone? No, I'm kidding. I'm not gonna do like a really long-winded intro. But I think we're just gonna discuss the idea of Apush pages 98 through 107. Okay. Enlightenment, economic developments, colonial politics. What's another topic? Social structure and mobility, religious life, cultural life. So there's the peoples of it is clear to me, and it would be a pretty accurate statement, or at least a statement with a lot of veracity, to say that people in America were teeming with ambition, brimming with ideas of liberty, and they were also so to speak of they were uh, they were also having a lot of kids. Not it's not metaphorically. They're also having a lot of metaphorical ideas, metaphorical children, but also they were having a lot of literal children. So the Enlightenment was told you to sort of question a lot of your ideas that you were before. So that reason, natural rights, and it established the primary principles of logic and skepticism and authority. It is interesting to note that the Americans often did not apply the skepticism equally. They applied it to sort of the natural spheres, things, but they didn't really apply it to their social structures as much. And this was probably due to the entrenched nature. Um, it was so sort of entrenched in their consciousness or the American ethos that they were unable to sort of imagine life any other way. They weren't able to sort of take this lens and apply it towards themselves. And that is often the most difficult thing, isn't it? To sort of apply the same lenses you view other things into yourself, apply the same skepticism, criticism, and to prove yourself in a really non-biased way. Okay, sorry, I went into a little bit aside there. Economic developments. I think that was the second topic I touched on. Just a lot of trade. Boston to Philadelphia, Charleston, cash crops, uh, laborers of enslaved Africans, natural servants. So this sort of maintained generations of family wealth. So this sort of just sort of disrupted the way social mobility would normally occur, because wealth built on wealth, built on wealth, built on wealth, and families would consolidate this with strategic marriages to basically ensure that their children would often be more wealthy than they started with. Politics, Britain. Britain was sort of becoming an overbearing mother, sort of, so to say, so to speak of, metaphorically. There was increasing tension with Britain over taxation, trade restrictions, representations. It's sort of like if you imagine your parent or something suddenly saying, suddenly stricting up on you and not allowing you to do any of the previous freedoms you were allowed. I think any rational person or rational child would be a little bit, at least a little bit, vexed or frustrated from that. And as time went on, local assemblies grew together, and they started off softly. But as time went on, they grew louder and louder and louder until their cry started spreading across the colonies, newspapers, pamphlets, and revolutionary ideas were being spread. And these ideas sort of were like a tinderbox. Once you light, it's revolutionary ideas are something that you have to smash out quick. Britain sort of known that. If you see their treatment of people in, for example, India, they knew if you let a revolution sort of foster, fester, it'll eventually get infected and eventually grow to a big problem. Britain wasn't really prompt in crushing down these rebellions because they had other problems in Europe, in other ways, and many of these rebellions were also logical rebellions. They used justifications from the Enlightenment. For example, we believe have these natural rights. We believe we have the freedom of speech. We believe we have the freedom to property. Well, Britain believed the property is maybe your property, but it is eventually all the king's property by metaphor. Religion. Enlightenment rationalism encouraged some skepticism. People started thinking, if there truly is a God, uh, is there truly a God? Is it really there? And what kind of God could be there? Is it truly the sort of Abrahamic God we've always imagined, or is that a realistic? Is there a higher probability of that than some other explanation, some naturalistic explanation, for example? There were a lot of, and this has caused a lot of diversity in the denominations people chose. For example, one person might wish to be an Anglican congregationalist. Quaker because they might feel that that better explains reality than the other. Some just did it because of their parents, obviously. I think there was a study once that said uh, like 80% or something of people whose parents are religious tend to be religious. Or it was a little bit higher. I don't quite remember the number, but it was a number above 50%. That and it was statistically significant. So it indicates that often families, uh, sort of being led in a religion, cause you to be religious. Um, and perhaps the Enlightenment was so powerful that it allowed children who'd grown up religious sort of question their ideals. I don't think I need to talk about arts, literature, or science flourishing. I think we can just sort of glaze over that for a bit. Um, right now, the republic is sort of not even born yet. It's sort of in. It hasn't even been birthed yet. It's before its birth. Just the ideas of it are being started up, and it's kind of. I think there's a little bit of irony in it, and I'll explain why. Um, so imagine if you're I can't think of a good metaphor for this, but I'll just state it. It's kind of ironic that uh, the 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 colonists were calling for freedom, uh, freedom from taxation. In fact, was one of the main ones. And it's ironic that despite doing that, they maintained a system of unfreedom. They made a system of slavery inside their very own homes. It'd be like if you saw like an advocate um, for animal rights, and you were like, and you saw him going home, and he was like killing an animal. You'd be completely outraged, and it is an irony that it's poetic sort of, and it's a little bit different. It doesn't map one to one to the analogy, but I think there's is a real sense of irony there that revolutionaries would demand religion. So culture, yeah, it's really nice. There's a little bit of irony there too. Economy, labor, every ship, every single product produced of tobacco had often, I'd say a large portion of them has slave connections. Every single one of them was tainted in the sense that it had been made with somebody else's labor that did not wish to be labored, that was forced to labor. And for those of us in this podcast who uh, don't believe in the ownership of human beings, I think that seems a little bit wrong. Yes. So history and yeah, key takeaways. How does this relate to my life? How does this relate to my life? Well, I think, and yeah, there's I've said this for the last two other podcast episodes, but the main way it relates to my life is simply the only way I can think of is the fact that the Enlightenment ideals are still very much present in today's time, and I think they're possibly more important now, especially when the amount of misinformation is much more spreading. Because back then there was a lack of information. That was the problem. For example, if you wanted to know about things, it was very difficult to know about them. Now the problem is there's too much information. There's a misinformation, and often information sources you cannot. It's very difficult to parse if these sources are actually reliable and actually giving you a unbiased, nuanced understanding of the topic rather than oversimplifications that tend to occur. I think it was Einstein that said topics should be simplified as much as they can be, but no further. So you should simplify things to the simplest they can be, such as Occam's razor, the simplest explanation for something, a thing, but no more than that. So there's no point in sort of oversimplification because it doesn't result in you having a good, nuanced understanding of the topic. And what surprised me the most, I think, is the second question. To be honest, nothing much surprised me because like, I feel like this is like pretty much common knowledge. Colonial. I'm just gonna say like the the social structure. I suppose I might have viewed Americans sort of rose tinted classes to say in hindsight. Often makes things look better than they actually were, especially when you have a partial hindsight. You see everything because you don't have a proper historical context. So I think the social mobility, the fact that there was such a lack of social mobility, was what surprised me the most. Thank you guys. See you guys in the next podcast. Thank you guys.